Episode 8 of the Rugby League United podcast. We've been headlining, focusing on some of the headline makers, the sports headline makers on this series so far. This week, I'm keen to get to know a little bit more about one of the leading lights behind the headlines, a man who has been added to the RFL Roll of Honour. The RFL Benevolent Fund has been involved and was indeed developed for players, families, and those suffering life-changing injuries, and sometimes far worse than that, playing the sport of rugby league. And it's their general manager, Steve Ball, who's our guest this week. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
How are you, first of all, and how's this period been for you?
Well, it's certainly not normal, and it's even worse for those people who I deal with in the line of work. Those people that have had catastrophic injuries and are at home. I think they've felt it more than anybody else in the entire country, to be honest.
We'll talk a little bit more about your line of work and the importance of the RFL Benevolent Fund. But in terms of the job that you do, how has that been impacted by where we've been the last few months?
Well, you would think with no rugby league taking place, it would be very quiet. But the demands of the Benevolent Fund over the past 3-4 months have been absolutely massive. We look after people who have had serious life-changing injuries. A lot of them rely on healthcare workers and people coming to visit them, not just for their physical well-being, but for the mental state of mind as well. And their world's been absolutely turned upside down. They've been forced into shielding. They've been very reliant on healthcare workers. At the worst, some of the health workers weren't coming to attend them and to look after them. And of course, the visitors who come round and cheer them up periodically, family and friends, have been absent because they haven't been allowed in the house. So it's been a very strange and stressful time for a lot of the lads who have sustained these injuries, and the Benevolent Fund oversees some of the things that we can support them with.
And I guess the danger is, in the circumstances we're in now, and I know this myself through the conversations I've had with my friend Rob Burrow, who I speak to every week, is that at times where you want to step in and improve things, it's actually going to deteriorate because for the reasons you've just mentioned.
Absolutely. We've had inquests cancelled. Scott Stevenson, who tragically died playing for the RF against the Army, his inquest was postponed. And you can imagine the upset and anguish of his family, having prepared mentally for an inquest, only to see it postponed, and planned sometime in the future. Where we've had people like Mossy Masu in Pinderfield, who relies heavily on visitors coming to see him and intensive physio. First of all, he was denied access to people visiting him, and then we had to battle hard for him to stay in Pinderfield as long as he could, in order that he could have that intensive physio that wasn't available once he got home. So there's a whole range of things that have been strange, have been demanding, and has taken its toll on some of the, what we call beneficiaries, but some of the lads we look after.
We'll come on to some of those, the lads that you look after, as you put it, and the way that the Benevolent Fund works and has evolved. Tell me about you, first of all. I want to understand about you and how you got into this line of work. What was your first job?
I was a teacher originally, going back some years. I was the first one that introduced Jason Robinson, the so-called Rugby Union World Cup star. I had him as a 9-year-old at Cross Flats Middle School in Leeds. I'm a rugby league nut. Rugby league is my sport. I love it. I cherish it. I think its values are something that we can live our lives by, and I'm proud to be part of that family. I played a little bit of rugby league, coached both open age and junior teams and school teams in my 20s, and then by a set of circumstances, I became chairman of Batley Rugby League Club, having moved into the town 3 months earlier. I adore the sport. I enjoy the camaraderie, the fun it brings, and sometimes the heartache it brings as well. It's very similar to being in love with somebody of the opposite sex, and sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's just not so great. I'll be married to it for the rest of my life.
Sure, yeah, and I think a lot of us can associate with that. The description of a rugby league family at times from those colleagues I've worked with who've never really understood rugby league have kind of mocked me for that reference. But what you've described kind of encapsulates what people mean when they put it like that, I suppose.
It's interesting. I often hear people use the expression "family of rugby league" without truly understanding it.
Yeah.
Particularly, I know a particular former chairman of the rugby league who used it indiscriminately and never quite understood what it meant. That camaraderie, that sense of belonging, and I think you've got to have bought into it over a number of years. And we've seen when tragedy happens in such circumstances, how the family of rugby league rally round more than any other sport. All your wealthy sports, I'll include football amongst that, with its billionaire owners from the oil-rich states of the Middle East. It can't hold a light to rugby. And I'm very proud to coordinate all those efforts at times with people sometimes who have very little resource, but a great deal of passion and understanding. I'll just quantify that with an example. When the tragedy of Lizzie Jones, who lost her husband, Danny playing for Keighley, we actually set up a trust fund, the Benevolent Fund did, for twins, Phoebe and Bobby, and we raised like £350,000, which seems a great deal of money, but the twins were 5 months old. If you divide that by 18, it's not such a vast amount of money when you talk about annual income. But £120,000 of that £300,000 plus came in bucket collections. That's a lot of 20 pences, and the vast majority of the fundraising for Danny Jones's widow and children came from women, because they empathised with obviously Lizzie, and that empathy showed through. And it was great to see how people's small contribution, the momentum we gained from that, of mum in her late 20s by herself, being widowed, being left with 2 5-month-old children. Very proud of rugby league in that sense, and the contribution made by everybody throughout the game. You know, players, under 11 teams that donated pocket money, to people doing bucket collections, to people doing fundraising. Just being part of that was something very special for me.
Do you think, just one more on the discussion of the rugby league family and what it is and what it stands for and how it can have that proud boast perhaps alongside other sports, do you think that is the key word you just said, empathy, and why there is this come together at times of adversity within the sport, which you would argue is perhaps stronger than sports like football, where there is that void between the person who goes down and watches it and the millionaire on the pitch?
Well, I look at Wembley sometimes. I used to go down as a kid from school. We used to love looking out for shirts and where they came from, and we can go to matches as a family, wear our shirts with pride. Again, I think the women's influence on the game is apparent, that family value of how to behave. And it's great when I go on holiday, I look for people in Widnes t-shirts or St Helens or Wigan or Leeds or whatever, have a bit of crack, and it's an instant friendship. Whether that would be the same if you were fans of Murray or Federer or cricket supporters, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm very much pleased to be part of that family. It's a very tight-knit group, almost isolationist that time, I live up in Hexham, and I must know every rugby league supporter in Hexham, and I cherish everyone that I meet every month. It's a natural introduction of, did you watch the match?
Yeah.
What did you think of it? And how do you think that the Great Britain team or your team will be performing next year, or hopefully next year as time goes on?
You know, I used to be the opposite. When I went on holiday and I saw rugby league shirts, I used to hide because I used to think they would come and have a go at me for something I've said in commentary or something I've written about their team. And
I can only assume your commentary's got better over the years. I can't see you hiding underneath any holiday tables, but I would imagine you'd like to do so now.
No, I kind of joke about that. We'll talk a bit more about your role and what it entails in a sec, but it is about giving. It's about supporting others. But I want to understand how you got to do that. You mentioned, I mean, your CV, fairly impressive. The clubs you've worked for: Hull FC, Hunslet, RFL, Leeds. You mentioned Batley, and into your current role. So you must have some. I'm trying to get to know you a little bit here. You must have some self-career drive about you, even though what the job you do now is fairly kind of.
I was very privileged. I was very privileged because when I was at Batley, I was involved in something called Batley City Challenge, which involved raising money for the community and then spending it in terms of economic regeneration. I believe Batley at that time, when I was chairman, got something like £3.5 million, which was in the late 80s extraordinary. And I saw the power of sport then, and the power of connecting with the community. Very proud of what I did at Batley. It was my first love as such, which is something very topical. There was in the early 1990s, there was the worst race riots in Europe in Dewsbury at Savile and Batley was literally 3 miles from the epicenter of those race riots. We weren't touched by it at all because we'd identified with the Batley community. We had outreach programs as such, and I realised that was the future of rugby league, for it to connect with its communities and represent everybody from 103 to 3 in terms of providing something for them. And people saying, you know, when they go on holidays, I'm from Batley, do you support Batley Rugby League Club? Yes, I do. And that really was what I wanted to be involved with. I got involved because of the £3.5 million. We're doing some major projects, some in the community, some physical. Because I had that capacity to raise money, I was always wanted in clubs to be part of their team. It's anybody who's been involved full-time in sport, in rugby league for 35 years, must be doing something right. And it is the fact I was at that capacity to gain money and do projects and connect with communities. I can only think of Gary Hetherington at Leeds, who's been around, I think, slightly longer than me, about a year or so longer than I, and I had the privilege of working alongside Gary when I was at Leeds for 10 years.
The period that you've just outlined, and that you were involved with those clubs, and this is a theme that's really come through quite strong on this podcast series, through various players and coaches who've grown up in this macho world that we've come to know, and I guess it's a stereotype we're trying to get away from in rugby league, but something that certainly Dennis Betts talked about and Rhys Lynn talked about, that young lads coming through would have to kind of hide their feelings because it was so macho, and no one really talked about the welfare side, the mental welfare side. What were your experiences of that through the clubs you've worked in?
It's strange. A lot of clubs had a philosophy that players were a commodity. Some of the players didn't help themselves either in their attitude to the clubs. It was a lot easier when clubs returned the player register and players had been there 6, 8, 10 years as a matter of normality. Now it's slightly more difficult in the sense that there's a great rotation of players. And as such, our responsibility is just to broaden it out. You know, the people who supported Danny Jones were all from Keighley. They were from the wider rugby league community. And I think what I have seen, yes, rugby league is very tough, but there's a realisation from the spectators that when something absolutely dreadful happens, it's the responsibility of us all, not just those supporters who support a specific team where that player has been injured.
So you've been involved with the Benevolent Fund since 2006, was it?
Yeah, 2006. I've seen most things. I've seen a change in the Benevolent Fund. It was very macho. What we tried to do originally was re-engage people who'd been lost to the game. In the 80s, and I can go back even longer than that, a couple of £1,000 were raised for a player, and then even though his injuries was life-changing, it was forgotten about. So what we've tried to do is originally to connect all those people together. We've got a great social team as well. If you understand the Benevolent Fund, I use this as a story, that every year I take a group of rugby players to Wembley who happen to be disabled. I don't take a group of disabled people to Wembley to watch the rugby. They're as much part of the rugby league family as any other part. And over the years, the Benevolent Fund is for amateurs, it's for professionals, it's for referees and coaches. And more recently, about 10% of all our cases are women who play the game. We had a recent case of somebody who got injured and had to go into hospital, and we supported them by paying their childcare costs. Now, that would have been unheard of 10 years ago, but that, as the games evolve, so is our responsibility to all those players that play the game.
So if the initial goal or the initial aim of the RFL's Benevolent Fund was to re-engage players who perhaps, or people who've been lost to the game, did subsequent events, and you've outlined a couple already, did subsequent events kind of shape the course of what you were there for?
It's strange, because you would think people who've had a terrible injuries connected with the game would be anti the game of rugby league, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. There were the forgotten people of the game. I go back to the actual origin of the Benevolent Fund, which was, as you said, only set up in the mid 2000s as such, and there was a generalisation that if somebody got injured, it wasn't about a bucket collection for 2 months. It was about a lifelong commitment. And the injuries of Danny Scott, who played for Moll Green in Huddersfield, and Matt King, who played for the academy team at London Broncos, really highlighted that it was a lifelong commitment. We'll raise some money for you because of the immediate problems such an injury would bring, but it was that lifelong commitment to say it's not just about £5,000-10,000. It's about meeting at Wembley. It's about refurbishing your house. I'll quote the case of a lad called John Burke, who was a great friend of mine. He played for Workington and got injured when he was 21. And for over 30 odd years, he put the kettle on with a walking stick. Now that can't be right. And just being part of re-establishing as the new normal, or as good as the new normal gets, we contributed to the refurbishment of his kitchen. It didn't have to go to the swimming baths to get a shower, and we restored people's dignity who'd struggled through no fault of their own.
I just think how I can put this, but I mean, through the remarkable work that you're doing and you've outlined, how can you make so confidently that lifetime commitment when, as a charity, we know that funds are bottomless, and you don't know how many cases and how many severe cases there are going to be. So that must give some anxiety to you financially. It's like, how can we make these commitments?
The first thing I say to people in injuries, and again recently, Mossy Masood, when I saw him at Leeds General Infirmary, there was this enormous 6'7", Samoan prop forward, and his wife let me visit him and speak to him by myself. I held his hand and I said, I'm here to help, and you and I are going to become great friends. And I spoke not just for Steve Blow or the Benevolent Fund, I spoke for the whole of Rugby League. I don't think I would have said that a month before I'm holding his hand, but, and he smiled, because it doesn't come with a script when you have a terrible injury. Those people that are injured are more concerned often for the families than they are for themselves. But we give that commitment to support, and whether I have confidence in the family of Rugby League, I know we can give that commitment to support them for as long as we can.
What did he say back to you after you said you were there?
He smiled. He couldn't move at all. I took that as a yes. Sometimes when you're in situations, you don't want to hang around and have a conversation for an hour or so, but he knew, and his wife knew, that throughout the journey that he was about to embark on, which must have been terrifying for both him and his wife and his family, that we were there as a guide and support, and often for the club involved as well. Hull Kingston Rovers hadn't seen anything like it in their history, and it was a guide for both Mossy and his family and for the club, because I drew on experiences that I had with other people, and I think it's proved, and he tells me and his wife tells me, it's proved invaluable to him.
You've just kind of second guessed my next question, I suppose. The word experience there. I was going to ask you how on earth you learn in the role that has been moulded really for you, or you've moulded yourself, how you learn to react in situations like that when you're dealing firsthand with someone who is going through life-changing trauma, and there's going to be a dependency on you, and I guess there's pressure on you just to not just do the right thing, but in the right way, and offer it in the right way.
It's strange. Again, I'll use Mossy, and I'll use another example where is completely different. The lads who have been in Mossy's position often tell me they're more worried about the partner and paying the mortgage and what happens next. So we take away that worry as an instance, and we concentrate on them getting better. And I remember Pete Stevenson and Jimmy Kittin saying to me, when we used to lay at bed at night for hours on end, we used to tell our big toe to wiggle. Something as bizarre as that. If you could get a message from your head to your big toe, you were doing a lot better than just moving your big toe. And I passed that message on very early to Mossy. What can you feel? What can you move? Everything was a bonus. I took Pete Stevenson with me to visit him once. Pete had a very, very similar injury to Mossy, and Mossy could see that this lad who'd had the same injury as he could sit down, stand up, and make his way to the car. Now, that doesn't cost a great deal of money. That's using some expertise that you've got and encouragement to others. That was one case of Mossy. One of the proudest things I've done was when the Cumbrian shootings, if you remember, there was a taxi driver called Derek Bird who indiscriminately shot and killed about 13 people, and one of those was a lad called Gary Purdom, who was a farmer who played for Whitehaven and Workington and had serious connections with Egremont. And I remember seeing his wife like 2 days after your husband's been shot in the most tragic of circumstances. And I felt the emotion. I genuinely said all the things I'm saying to you, but with tears in my eyes and tears coming down my eyes. And the family said to me afterwards, they appreciated the fact I wasn't just coming round and saying the words, that I felt something, and that I worked upon the emotion and the emotion of the rugby league family in saying, you've got two lads here, 8 and 2, we'll do everything possible we can to support you and those two lads, like it was any other player, whether he plays for an amateur club or a professional club. You know, what's happened to your family is wrong, and we're here to support you.
I remember those the shooting, Steve, really clearly. I actually
one of the for instances, and you spoke what experience have you got? I spoke to Roz's wife yesterday, in fact, because the lad's just gone through secondary school and taken his A levels, and comically he calls me Uncle Stevie, but I think
Uncle Steve.
I think I've christened myself as Uncle Stevie anyway. But I remember saying to her when the funeral took place, how many people do you think will come? She says, well, we're a small, tight-knit family. She says, no more than a couple of dozen. So I looked at her and I thought, well, there'll be hundreds there. I said, well, just indulge me. We'll order all the cards, and we'll put a PA system out just in case more people come, because they want to show the respects to Gary. She said, oh, I don't, there won't be many people. As it turned out, she took my advice, and there were 2,000 people at the church. Absolutely incredible. And it's that understanding. They didn't come because he was a rugby league player. They came to show respect for the family. And it was quite, it was very emotional. And I thought to myself, with all these people, and you can tell, almost like a big game. If you've got queues at the turnstile 2 hours beforehand, you're going to have thousands of people there. And they were queuing down the street. And it was very proud. I was very proud in thinking the Rugby League have helped organise this, because the family would have been in real trouble otherwise, just dealing with that when their emotions were so high.
My experience at that time, Steve, and I'd just moved down to London. I think 2007, I moved down to London from Yorkshire, made the big leap to try and go down there for work. And I was friends at the time with Luke Dawn, who played at London Harlequins, and through him got to know Rob Purdon quite well. And obviously Gary was his brother.
Yeah. And
I remember when it happened, and this is the way journalism operates. People in the office knew I was mates with Luke and with Rob, and all they wanted to know is, can you get the interview? And that put me in a really difficult position, because just like you're outlining there, you just think, what is he going through, and what is that family go through? And then the other side of it, the journalism pressure to use your contact to get a story. And I found that I really struggled with that, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to. Do you know what I mean? It's like you just outlined how you reached out, and I'm being told
it's interesting
to go and try and get an interview.
People were ringing the bell. His wife was a teacher at the time.
Yeah.
There were journalists in the playground asking the kids. His dad was a farmer. There was journalists at the end of his track. And all they wanted to do was bury themselves and hide themselves away for a time. But we produce things like family statements because we appreciate journalists have a job to do. People want to know, but just controlling the media as best as we could, informing them of what we were doing, but protecting the family at all time. And more importantly, protecting the two young lads at 8 and 2, not just for that week, that month, that year, but hopefully until they reach the stage where they didn't need protection anymore.
Yeah, it's finding that balance, isn't it, between support and intrusion, because you need to from the personal side let people know that you're there. You might they might not want to talk to you, but you want them to know you are there, and you are there to help. It's
absolutely.
Kind of fine line.
We put on one of the golden times, I remember, was that Workington and Whitehaven and Egremont came together, and we put on a match, Cumbria versus England. Steve McNamara, to his credit, brought an England side down to play, and we raised £83,000 at a game for Gary, again to put in a trust fund for his 2 kids. And seeing, you know, arch enemies, and often, I dare say, sometimes foolish enemies. You know, there's a lot more unites Whitehaven and Workington that keeps them apart. But they came together for that player's family, and she calls it good money. You know, it was raised with the best intention, and everybody came together just to honour it, and at the same time have fun. And respect rugby league as well as those people that play it.
Did that awful experience of that time and the relationship you forged with and the support you were able to give the Purdon family, did that help you when 3 years later we lost Steve Prescott?
Steve Prescott was a great character. The Prescott Foundation is one of the biggest fundraisers for the Benevolent Fund now. It raises between £40,000 and £80,000 per year for the Benevolent Fund. And Steve Prescott, more than anybody else I know, completely got what the Benevolent Fund was all about. It was all about inclusion. It was all about bringing people back into the game. And some of his challenges, you know, again, I'll use Pete Stevenson and Jimmy Gittins and others who took part in them. He brought them back into the game. He supported them. He knew what to say to every one of them. He was a great man. And at the same time, probably didn't realise what an impact it was having upon everybody. And I still work with some of his colleagues at the SPF, you know, the Martin Blondells of this world, who still support us. And dealing with Steve Prescott was a breath of fresh air, and he gave us, you know, a driving force behind us to think this is what we're doing is right. And he contributed at that time half of whatever the Steve Prescott Fund made to the Benevolent Fund, and we continue to benefit from that. He was a great man.
And his son is now kind of taking on the baton. I don't know if you've seen, Steve, that what Taylor Prescott has just announced that he's doing in a couple of weeks' time.
It's always onerous for a son or a daughter to emulate his you know, successful parents. So I can only tip my cap to him and say, well done, Taylor. And Kobe, his brother, will no doubt follow in his line. And Lindsay is just a special person anyway. So every year we take Steve's immediate family to Wembley just as a thank you. And they are just, as we were to them, they're much as part of our family as we are to them.
Yeah, Taylor Prescott is just about to run 7 ultra marathons in 7 days to get virtually from St Helens to Wembley for the day that the cup final should have been on. And let me tell you, having spent last summer with him cycling through France, he will do it, because he has that mentality.
I'm sure he will. For a man who struggles to take his dog around the park, I have some empathy with him and complete admiration.
Well, Taylor doesn't run more than 10k, and he just said in the way he does, oh, I just popped out for a 22 miler and I felt fine, so I'm going to give it a go.
I think I may have left it too late in the day for a 22 miler at my age, but I'll be with him in spirit.
This is all, I mean, the work that you do is remarkable, fantastic, and it's all about the inclusivity and incredibly selfless. But you must personally get a lot of pride from it. That's one of the great things about working in the field like you do, and the giving aspect of, I don't know, whether it's fundraising or support. Individually, that must give you a real lift.
I enjoy it, although it's really demanding at times. I don't enjoy it as such. when you stand by somebody's bed after they've had such an injury. But you think, I can make a difference here. It's always difficult when you're by somebody's side and you can see the fear in their eyes. But I take great satisfaction in knowing that after a visit, not necessarily from me, but from the Benevolent Fund, that it will give them some comfort, it will help steer them. I've said it before, we aren't there to change anything, we can't change anything, but sometimes we can take the sharpest corners away from families, and that's often a help. And the journey is a very lonely one, you know, and we're there for the long term, and the satisfaction that brings when we see people reconstitute their lives as well. It's not necessarily about the physicalness of their injuries. We've seen lads go to university, retrain, from doing media degrees for an electrician who could never work again effectively. We retrained him into doing something different, to being an architect as such. Matt King, who was as severely injured as you can imagine, he retrained and has worked as a lawyer and a solicitor for people who, in similar circumstances as himself, those that had catastrophic injuries. So it's not necessarily all about the physical side, it's about the emotional side as well, because often these lads dip, as you would do, as I would do, as you would do. And as important, making sure that the new normal is something that they can have a contribution to, and that they can retrain and they can go out and they can find new partners and lead a new life. And that's all very exciting. And I share some of that excitement with them because I've become great friends with a great many of them.
Yeah, I was going to say the word fulfillment. It strikes me that your role, as demanding as it must be, is also incredibly fulfilling.
It is, and you can see where you've been sometimes. You can see with people's journeys. Mossy is a good example. His journey is relatively short. I mean, he only got injured in January, and it's the beginning of July now. His journey's been a tremendous one, but sometimes the journey is a lifelong journey, and you can see the progression in people step by step. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and I'm proud to call many of them my friends and my heroes in rugby league. Originally, they used to be the Billy Bostons, Neil Fox and Roger Millwards of this world, but these lads to me are as much a hero as anybody who's played the game.
Are you the kind of person who tries to find hope in every situation?
I try to find a lighter side. Hope is a different way. You know, when things go wrong, you know, you say to people, I never say to people, I know how you feel, because I have no idea. I can only imagine how you feel, because we don't know how people feel, and we try to understand, but it's very difficult. So if I can shine a light on things that are remotely funny, or something that they can smile about, or something optimistic in the future, I enjoy it. And that's why occasions such as the grand final at Old Trafford, where we go to, and we go to Wembley, as I've spoken before, they're great days for me. It's daft lads having a great weekend, and that's always something to look forward to.
That's a key point, actually, that you've just made, that you can't ever say to someone, I know how you feel, because you draw on your own experiences, but even if you're drawing on experience where you've been in exactly the same situation, you can only remember how you felt in that situation. You don't know how that person is feeling in the same situation.
Absolutely, and everybody's circumstances are different, and everybody's mental state is different. And I speak to people, and I tell them the truth. I don't hide anything. You know, I don't try to gloss things up. And I've learned things over a period of the last 15 years as such. For example, if somebody's seriously injured, I don't say to him, "How are you?" Because he could well look at me and say, "How do you think I've broken my spine?" But if I say to him, "How are you today?" that's a completely different question. And it's just understanding the nuances of conversation, of being in their position, and just trying to understand, and a lot of the people in these circumstances, fit, strong, athletic human beings have to learn literally baby steps in how to get the life back together. And that takes a long time and is something that you can't rush. So, my daughter, who's a lot brighter than me, calls me an active listener. And I think that's a good description. I like listening to what people say. And when I go see people, it's bizarre. I talk about rugby league for 50 minutes and how they are for 10 minutes. And I'm not there as a social worker. I'm there as a rugby league person who cares. And I think everybody in rugby league can identify with that. We want to know what you think. You have an opinion about whether Wigan's try in the corner was should have been allowed, or the video referee should be banned, or whatever. They enjoy all those conversations, but at the end, the meaningful last 10 minutes is what it's all about. And that's understanding people, and that's understanding rugby league people as well.
What have you made of Rob Burrow and how he has responded to what was the most devastating of diagnoses?
Again, an incredible situation. Rob's disease, which other players have suffered from over the years, they're coming round together. I think he was very lucky in it. Leeds Rhinos were tremendous to him. But the love is felt from all over the country. I've visited him in his house as a friend. I know his dad, Jeff, very well, and his family. He has tremendous resource, great courage, and it's a scary time for Rob, as it would be for everybody. But what it does see time and time again is that rugby league people pulling together, and the fact you can have so many people at a Bradford friendly game that they could have sold out and told twice after, and just the organisational of ordinary skills of ordinary people who just want to say, "I'm thinking about you and I want to help you as best as I can." Absolutely tremendous. There are a lot of Rob Burrows all over the country with a similar sort of life-changing disease. But what makes Rob special is that he was a special person and a special family as well. And again, Leeds Rhinos can be very proud of what they've done for him, but so can the whole of rugby league.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the Burrows. How do you relax? What you've just described and what you go through every day, seeing these people face to face, and the awful hands they've been dealt, must be all consuming. And obviously, there's a danger that the impact it might have on you. So, how do you keep yourself going, and how do you make sure that your stress bucket keeps flowing in the right direction?
I love laughing. I love a little bit of fun. You'll be surprised at this. I live up in Hexham. I get involved in the community centre, which I'm chairman of the trustees, and we've just started playing rugby at Hexham Middle School. So it's a bit self-indulgent. I watch all their matches. There's a mad keen lad called Carl Barry, who organises all the teams. They're all of a muchness, in truth. He organises them a bit better than the other teams, and I love going to watch it. It's pure rugby league. It brings none of the baggage that some of the northern clubs and schools might have. It's people who are enthusiastic about a game that they haven't played from. And this year, we'd organised 100 kids from Hexham, which is near Newcastle, to go watch the Rugby League Cup final, which would have been in a couple of weeks' time. We got them all special hats. 100 kids from one school is something else. So we're hoping we can transfer that later to a match wherever it is. But I relax by watching kids playing rugby league. That's really sad, isn't it?
That is the most rugby league answer ever. As a final thought then, Steve, if I asked you what your attitude to and outlook on life was, what would you say?
That's a difficult one. I think you always start with yourself. Always be the best you can for you. And sometimes I let myself down in various ways, and I think things and don't behave as well as I could do. But in anything I do, I look at myself first and try to spread that out. That's why I like getting involved in community stuff. One person can do a lot more good if he shares that with 10 other people who then share it with 10 others. So just being the best I can, having some fun, enjoying life, having a drink, and watching Hexham middle school and championship schools in the future. That's what keeps me going anyway, at least for the time being. I'm very proud to be a senior member of that rugby league family and doing what I do. I love it as a job. I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Well, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you today, and thank you for the lesson in active listening as well.
I told you my daughter was a lot brighter than me.
Steve Ball, you've been brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.